From Transport Topics in Washington, D.C., this is RoadSigns. Here is your host, Seth Clevenger.
Thank you for listening to RoadSigns, the podcast series from Transport Topics that explores the trends and technologies that are shaping the future of trucking. In this episode, we're going to take you inside the making of TT's 2024 Top 50 Global Freight Companies list, which we just published on November 4th, both in print and online at ttnews.com. This annual report ranks the world's largest freight transportation companies across all geographies and modes of transportation, including truck, parcel, rail, ocean, air freight, as well as non-asset-based third-party logistics providers. To produce this list, we worked with SJ Consulting Group to rank these companies based on annual revenue from their freight operations. In addition to the main top 50 list, the publication also includes rankings of the largest container seaports and cargo airports in North America. If you haven't already done so, you can get exclusive access to the complete version of our Top 50 Global Freight Companies report by subscribing to Transport Topics at ttn.ws/ttsubscribe. You can also text TT-subscribe to 571-622-0001. And now, to discuss how we assembled this year's Top 50 list, I'm going to bring in my colleague, Mike Senatore, TT's Features Coordinator. Mike, thank you for your hard work on this project, as always, and also thanks for joining the podcast. So just to begin the conversation here, I'd like to start by briefly discussing the scope of this project and how we put it all together. So as I mentioned at the top, we work closely with SJ Consulting on the main Top 50 list. SJ compiles freight revenue data for these companies, and then we at Transport Topics add supplemental information such as equipment and asset information, executive leadership, details like that. But apart from that, we also produce a cover story dealing with international trade and global freight, as well as updated lists on the largest container ports and cargo airports in North America. So it is a pretty comprehensive project. This is our most holistic and global view of freight that we take a look at every year at Transport Topics. Now, Mike, you lead the data side of the project, so just take a moment here to explain the work that goes into gathering the information for this publication.
Sure. So as you said, Seth, the revenues that are featured on the top 50 list, they're largely collected and compiled by SJ Consulting Group, our partners on the project. And we work collaboratively with them to fill in any gaps and improve, the quality of the data that we're putting out on the list. After that, we collect that sort of supplementary company information, keeping company descriptions up to date, updating their freight assets and equipment, things like that largely falls on our end. As far as the container ports go, that is more of me doing the research and collecting those volume figures myself. And the cargo airports ranking comes from FAA. Specifically, they provide information for American airports. And on our end, we go and fill in the gaps for Canada and Mexico. So in all, it's an easier lift than our other annual list publications, especially as it's only a top 50 list as opposed to a top 100. But there's still a lot of elements to bring together, when putting the publication together.
Sure. Thanks for that. And one other little detail that I always like to note for folks who really dive into this list is, we're publishing this, pretty late in the year, but it is based on prior year data. So that's of course, the most recent full year. So we're looking at full year 2023 freight revenue for the top 50 list. So that is something to keep in mind. So it's the last of our 4 annual publications. So it's has the most the most lag effect, if you will. But it still gives you an updated look at who are truly the biggest players in freight, not just in the U.S., not just North America, but around the world and across all modes of transportation. So without delaying any further, I think it's time to go ahead and get into the rankings. So just taking a look here, once again, the top spot belongs to the e-commerce fulfillment and logistics business of Amazon. So we added them to the list at number 1 last year when we opened this list up to 3PL operations. Amazon, once again, is number 1. and they actually kind of bucked the trend. Most of the companies on this list saw pretty significant revenue declines last year in 2023. Amazon did not. They reported more than 140 billion in net sales from their third-party seller services in 2023. That was up from 117 billion a year earlier, so some significant growth. And also, just to be crystal clear, for the purposes of this list, we're only counting Amazon's e-commerce fulfillment and logistics operations for third parties, right? So we're excluding their online retail sales and other businesses like Amazon Web Services. So it's about a quarter of Amazon's total revenue that we factor in as 3PL and freight related. Then looking further down the list, we see FedEx actually moves up to number 2. They just moved past rival UPS to claim the number 2 ranking. FedEx generated more than 93 billion in revenue last year, and UPS was right behind at 91 billion. And then taking a look beyond that, the U.S. Postal Service with 79 billion in revenue moved up 2 positions to number 4, just ahead of Germany-based parcel and warehousing giant DHL. The largest ocean carrier on the list is still Maersk at number 6, despite a steep drop in revenue. They dropped down to just under 49 billion in 2023, and that compares with 80 billion the prior year. So it was a pretty significant decline. That's a quick look at the top of the list. But Mike, what ranking changes stand out to you as you review the overall top 50 list?
Well, FedEx leapfrogging UPS for the number 2 ranking is really the big headline to come from the top of the list. FedEx, as you said, was one of the few companies across the entire top 50 to increase its revenue in 2023. And this is noteworthy. UPS has been ahead of FedEx on our list since the 2021 edition, which is when UPS jumped into the number 1 spot on the list. Obviously before our edition of Amazon last year. In 2023, FedEx had a 4% jump in its revenue, while UPS conversely had had a decline of 9% year over year. And something else to keep an eye on, the company FedEx in particular has been undergoing a restructuring of its business units under one single parent organization, which has been fully implemented as of June this year. So the effect that that'll have on FedEx's operations and revenue will be something interesting to see for years going forward. And as for other ranking changes in the top 10, they were largely brought on by companies posting pretty significant revenue declines in 2023 compared to 2022. The biggest losses in the top 10 of the list are seen with Maersk and with CMA CGM, with revenue declines of 39 and 37%, respectively. Last year, the top 7 companies on the list, they all had revenues of $70 billion or more. And this year, the number of companies above that threshold shrank to just the top 4. So definitely some shrinking at the top of the list.
Yeah, all good insights there, and as we both mentioned, now it was a down year for a lot of global freight companies in 2023. Part of the value of this list is it's also providing some insight into overall market dynamics and business conditions, and of course that's tapping into whatever's happening not just in the U.S. economy but really globally, and what's affecting international trade. And there's so many different factors. That's of course there's been some geopolitical conflicts that have caused some challenges. The Red Sea, Middle East, Ukraine, all that has an effect on global trade. Of course, there's economic uncertainty. It's just been a challenging business environment for many of the world's largest transportation and logistics providers as a result of that. And the overwhelming majority of the companies that are on this year's top 50 list did see a downturn in revenue last year, and in many cases by wide margins. You mentioned a couple of the large ocean carriers that saw pretty significant drops there. Mike, what's your overall assessment of the the revenue trend for the companies on this list, and what would you say it reveals about overall business conditions? Again, very globally for international trade.
Yeah, well, the numbers paint a pretty tough picture for the companies on this year's list. 2023 brought a number of different challenges for global freight. 39 of the top 50 companies on our list faced revenue declines last year, and for 28 of those companies, the percentage by which revenue declined was at least 10% or higher. The good news, though, is that these declines didn't really come out of nowhere, and they were to some extent expected as a kind of normalization after the last few years saw real record high revenues driven by the freight boom after and during the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's heartening that revenues remained higher on average in 2023 than the last year pre-pandemic 2019, but at the same time, the severity of the declines from 2022 to 2023, it's nothing to scoff at.
Yeah. One other highlight I always like to raise with this list is any newcomers, any new names on the list, and we do have a few this year. So this year's list for the first time includes Canadian Pacific Kansas City, which debuts at number 32. So CPKC formed back in 2023 through the merger of Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern. They're operating now a single line railway connecting Canada, the United States, and Mexico. So very big merger in the world of North American railroad operators. Another addition to this year's top 50 is truck leasing and logistics provider Ryder System. So Ryder's, Ryder has seen a lot of growth in their 3PL and dedicated transportation divisions. Those parts of Ryder now debut at number 41 on this list. And this list, again, is based on freight revenue, so we're excluding Ryder's truck leasing and maintenance business for the purposes of our rankings. So we're just looking at the logistics and dedicated transportation, which now is more than half of Ryder's revenue. So they've really been expanding beyond that core truck leasing and maintenance business. Another newcomer, LTL carrier Estes Express, just cracks the list at number 50 this year. So that's another name that we all know here in North America that now is in the top 50 globally. Mike, when you take a look at the list, which newcomers stand out to you?
Well, the debut of Canadian Pacific Kansas City, that definitely stood out to me. We've been expecting the merged company to return to our list eventually once that merger was completed. The preceding companies, Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern, they last made our list in 2021, which featured their 2020 revenues. And on that list, Canadian Pacific came in at number 28, while Kansas City Southern just made the list at number 50. So this merger has been something that we've been keeping an eye on. It's been long awaited after being announced in 2021 and finally being completed just last year. So in that sense, 2023 was largely a year of sort of organizing their operations. So the company's 2024 revenue will likely paint a more full picture of what we can expect from them. As far as the other newcomers to the list, Ryder's addition this year, that was largely a case of assessing the company's fit for this list. And in the end, we felt that its 3PL and its dedicated operations warranted its inclusion. Estes, conversely, has made our list previously. Most recently in 2021, it made our list. And they benefited from some of the companies toward the end of last year's list facing steeper revenue declines in 2023.
Yeah, that's perfect. And yeah, right around the cutoff is where you see companies kind of drop off and rejoin from year to year, depending on what's happening in the broader market. As a reminder, you can view the entire top 50 list online at ttnews.com. And of course, you can get exclusive access to the complete version of our top 50 global freight companies report by subscribing to Transport Topics at ttn.ws/TT subscribe. So as we've been discussing, TT's top 50 global freight list is more than just a list. This is also an update on the state of global freight transportation. Our cover story this year focuses specifically on the international air freight market. Like most other modes of transportation, air freight has very much been on a roller coaster ride of ups and downs since the pandemic hit in 2020. Lately, demand has been up and cargo capacity has been tight. A lot of that's due to the continued growth of e-commerce. Also, we're hearing from some shippers that have been turning to air freight to help mitigate the risk of delays associated with ocean shipping currently. Mike, what are some of your thoughts on the state of air cargo, including volumes at North American airports, which is part of this report?
Yeah, well, this year has definitely seen improvement for air freight volumes in North America. As you mentioned, the continued growth of e-commerce has played a big role in this, similarly to the part that it played in the pandemic boom that we saw a few years ago. And this trend of growth for e-commerce and online shopping, this is expected to continue for the foreseeable future as well. Consumers are continuing to shift more towards digital options, which is encouraging purchases from merchants around the world as opposed to, just going down the street and buying something at your local mom and pop. The volume figures for the first half of 2024 are even rivaling those of the same period in 2021, which is when we saw those really record highs from the pandemic. And also, as you said, the disruptions that have been occurring with the ocean freight market, those are certainly playing a role as well, with environmental and geopolitical circumstances really factoring into the decision-making processes for shippers regarding whether to ship via air or via ocean. So in all, 2024 has definitely been a year of recovery for global air freight after a pretty lackluster 2023.
Yeah, for sure. And each year we usually spotlight a different mode of transportation. Haven't decided what we'll do next year. We'll let things play out a little bit before we make any final decisions on that. But it's a chance for us to explore what's happening in other modes of transportation beyond trucking. That of course feed into the trucking industry, but taking a closer look at what's happening, especially more of a global perspective. So every year when we put this top 50 list together, it's always interesting to see where North America's largest trucking and logistics businesses rank among the largest transportation companies in the world. So I always like to highlight that, the names that we all know and are very familiar with here in the North American trucking industry, where do they stack up globally, especially when you work in other modes of transportation. So the first name that really pops beyond, of course, Amazon, FedEx, UPS, and the Postal Service is C.H. Robinson, of course, the largest freight broker. Slipped one position this year to number 20. Its annual revenue dropped to about $16 billion last year, down from $23 billion the prior year. Was still not, good enough for number 20 on the list. Next up is intermodal and trucking company J.B. Hunt, is up a spot to number 26. So they had a slight revenue decline in 2023, but they still moved up because it was less of a decline than some of the other companies on the list. There was a more severe downturn for freight forwarder Expeditors International. So they are down to number 31 on the top 50 after ranking number 23 a year ago. Then we get into some more of the trucking companies on the list. LTL carrier XPO checks in at number 35 on the list with revenue of $7.7 billion last year. Truckload carrier Knight Swift is not far behind at number 39 with more than $7.1 billion in revenue. Also on the list is Canada-based trucking conglomerate TFI International. They move up 2 spots to number 43. And LTL carrier Old Dominion Freight Line jumps 5 spots to number 45. Also climbing the list is Schneider, moving up to number 47. That's up a couple spots from last year. Landstar System dropped 5 spots, but they are still on the list at number 48. As I mentioned earlier, Ryder System debuted at number 41. And Estes Express also joins the top 50 this year, or rejoins more accurately, just cracking the list at number 50. So that's quite a few names in our world and in the North American trucking industry that do stack up at least among the top 50 freight providers across all modes worldwide. Mike, what are your top takeaways regarding the North American companies that are on this list?
Yeah, well, although the total number of trucking logistics firms on the list increased this year with the addition of Estes, these companies largely faced similar revenue declines to companies in other modes of transportation in 2023. The the oversupply of capacity and weak demand that's been you know, determined to be a freight recession has forced trucking companies to adjust to weak freight rates and tighter margins. And 2024 has brought some improvement. There's been an uptick in demand thus far this year, but many of the challenges that were present last year, like specifically the supply chain disruptions, have persisted. Uh, the issues that we mentioned with ocean shipping earlier, as well as labor negotiations, specifically at ports, things like that. These have caused short-term spikes in shipping rates, but the spot market is still struggling to return to its pre-pandemic form, and carriers are continuing to be negatively affected by overcapacity.
Yeah, for sure. Really it's been 2.5 years of a down market, for freight and for North American truck freight. Still that overcapacity situation. There's just uh, too many trucks relative to freight volumes. So in a lot of cases, it's trucking companies that are moving similar volumes of freight, but for less money than they did a few years back. So that's been tough on the whole industry, or most of the industry for sure. And that has been reflected in the revenue and earnings reports that we've seen from trucking companies these past couple of years. We could spend a whole other podcast on discussing when that will turn around and what to expect in the year ahead, and I'm sure we will do that before the end of this year. But that's another topic for another day. I did want to touch on a couple other elements of this publication that you work on, Mike, and that's the uh, top 25 largest container ports list for North America. Just briefly, could you give us a quick overview of our updated seaport rankings and what were some of the highlights this year?
Sure. So we did see a change near the top of this year's container port ranking, with the Port of Long Beach reclaiming the number 2 spot that it lost on last year's list to the Port of New York and New Jersey. Uh, the Long Beach port faced its own issues, however, as did the majority of seaports on our list. Of the 25 ports on our list, only 6 processed more containers in 2023 than in 2022. And of those 6, only 2 are in the mainland United States. The declines were significant at the top of the list, with all of the top 4 seaports, Los Angeles, Long Beach, New York, New Jersey, and Savannah, experiencing declines in container volume of 12% or more. And the causes are really the usual suspects: normalization coming out of the pandemic, supply chain disruptions, and various global circumstances, particularly for ocean shipping, the drought that faced the Panama Canal, and later in 2023, the conflict in the Red Sea in particular. They both played pretty significant roles in increasing shipping times and forcing a lot of shippers to reconsider their freight strategies.
For sure. And one other element to highlight here is our ranking of the largest cargo airports in North America. So let's move on to air freight. What stands out this year on that list, Mike?
Well, the biggest takeaway from the air freight ranking is, again, the struggles faced in 2023. You can see it in the numbers here as well. 13 of the top 20 cargo airports in North America handled less cargo last year than in 2022. And more than 30 of the top 50 faced declines as well. Um, the biggest change toward the top of the rankings came at number 6, as LAX fell 2 spots from its number 4 ranking last year, with a volume decline of nearly 25%. It was passed on the list by Miami International Airport and Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, which both managed to increase volumes last year. As we talked about earlier, 2024 has brought better fortune for the air freight market, but looking at 2023 volumes in particular, it was largely a year of demand normalizing from the highs of the pandemic in recent years.
Yeah, that's right. And, we captured both, right? We were looking backwards with our lists based on 2023 data, but also in some of the other elements of the publication, looking forward and at the current market conditions, especially for the air freight sector this year, which we chose to spotlight. Definitely, looking to, that's moving in the right direction, and we're seeing growth, in the air cargo side of the industry for the last year or so. Now, lots of ground we've covered here. Again, the full report is online and available to subscribers. Mike, thank you once again for your help putting this together. This is a big project. All of these are. Maybe it's not quite as heavy a lift as our top 100 for-hire carriers or top 100 logistics providers, but it is still a large project, and appreciate the hard work. And also, thank you for sharing your insights with us on this podcast. So we hope you've enjoyed this inside look at the 2024 Transport Topics Top 50 Global Freight Companies list. Again, you can view the top 50 list and related information online at ttnews.com. And of course, if you're a TT subscriber, you already have a hard copy packaged with the November 4th issue of TT. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of RoadSigns. If so, please let others know. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If my questions have sparked questions of your own, share them with me and the RoadSigns team. You can email us at share@ttnews.com. Also, let us know how we did by texting TT Survey to 571-622-0001. And of course, we'll be back soon with a fresh episode of RoadSigns. Until then, I'm Seth Clevenger. Thank you for listening.
Did you know you can ask Alexa to open Transport Topics? In just 1 minute, you will hear the biggest trucking headlines of that day. Be prepared and start your morning off right with Transport Topics.